Good morning, everyone. We'll start slowly this morning. My name is Pierre Boileau. I'm a Senior Environmental Affairs Officer at the UN Environment Program, and I'll be moderating today. I'm very happy to see so many people join yesterday, and hopefully we'll have similar numbers for the session today. Today's session is on Science, Technology, and Innovation Policy Instrument Design. So we'll be having quite an extensive discussion on the different approaches to policy instrument design. We'll have a national example from Malaysia, and we'll be talking with a number of experts in this area. I'll just go through a few of the housekeeping items this morning. The training is being recorded. It will be conducted in English only. Both the recording and presentations will be available afterwards. Please mute yourself and turn off your camera when you're not speaking. We'll do the same. And please feel free to use the chat function for asking questions and sharing comments. We will track the questions that are asked in the chat, and during the Q&A session, we'll try and get to most of them. If not, we'll follow up with you afterwards. These online training sessions that we have been giving are regionally specific. This particular one is for the Asia Pacific region. I'll give a brief overview of the technology facilitation mechanism and the interagency task team that is performing these trainings under Workstream 6. And then we'll give an overview and outline of the sessions, and we'll speak about the Mentimeter questions that we'll be asking during the session to be able to get some feedback from you as the session progresses. So first of all, the technology facilitation mechanism is a capacity building program to support the implementation of the SDGs, formed in 2017. Several UN specialized agencies, a number of them present today, and regional economic commissions are contributing to the process. We in Workstream 6, our colleagues here, are responsible for the design and delivery of joint trainings and materials on implementation of STI policy for SDGs. We were asked yesterday what the materials would contribute to, and really what we're trying to help with is to ensure that experts and member state representatives who attend the training understand the best practices for developing science, technology, and innovation policy, making sure that those policies are effective and that they're properly evaluated. We will try and provide you with some tools during the training so that you can follow up with using those tools to be able to help develop those STI policies. And we'll have country examples to be able to show you what's been done in other countries and that what you may be able to adapt to your national situation. We've done many of these training workshops already. As you can see, we've done 4 trainings in Latin America, 2 in Africa, 2 in the Arab states, and we've done 1 international training. Some are in person and some are online trainings, and we can reach a fairly large audience doing these trainings to be able to help people understand the scope of STI policy and how it's best implemented. Our geographic coverage is pretty heavily weighted towards Latin America and the Caribbean at the moment, but of course we'll balance that out with this training in the Asia Pacific region. What we're trying to do is try and reach as many people as possible and provide some context on STI policy. So we've had over 1,200 participants, fairly good gender balance, and a fairly good geographic balance, I think, now. We have a fairly well-organized website based from the SDGs website. You could receive concept notes, PowerPoint presentations, exercises, and recordings. And we have booklets in various different languages to explain the various elements of STI policy development. We'll take a look at this session 2 and the overview of the different presentations we'll give today. This session is on STI policy instrument design, so it's going to delve deep into how we go about those sessions, and we'll have a little Mentimeter survey in a second to be able to give you a sense of, or to be able to get some feedback from you on your knowledge of STI policy development and design. The Mentimeter quizzes are fairly easy to access. You can use your phone and just simply scan the QR code here on this page, or you can go into the chat and click on the link that will be provided in the chat to be able to get to the Mentimeter quiz. We really appreciate all of your feedback because it gives us a very good idea of how far we have reached and the types of information that is most useful to you so that we can improve the trainings going forward. As I said, we have a session this morning for 1 hour where we will give an overview of public policy and policy instrument design for STI from Dimo. There's another session on design and evaluating research funding with impact from Diego, and insights and guidance for the design of national innovation funds from Alessandro. And then another hour, and then we'll close off. We'll cover in that hour demand-side instruments, including various different examples of policy instruments to be used, Malaysia's experience in designing the national biotechnology law, and we'll speak about another case study for procurement for innovation, which Dimo will present for us a little bit later. We have several expert presenters today, and they have all contributed to previous trainings. We have Dino Kolovsky, who will give the presentation on instrument design and the case study at the end. Diego Chavarro from UN-IATT, who will give us an overview of various different examples. Alessandro Bello from OACPS, Fernando Santiago from UNIDO, and our country example will come from Dr. Noor Ashikin Mohammed Yusuf from the Technology University in Malaysia. So I look forward to having, let me see if my share has gone off. Okay, thank you very much to my colleagues for putting in the Mentimeter question. We really would like to understand your level of knowledge related to STI policy instruments. And hopefully you can scan the QR code or go to the link in the chat, and we'll see how knowledgeable the audience is at the moment. Thank you. I'm not seeing it changing very much at the moment, but first we're seeing that we have first-time people. More than half of people here are being introduced to the concept, so we're very happy to have you aboard and being able to explain a number of the elements of STI policy design. About 40% are familiar with the concept, and some have already designed STI policy instruments, so that's very helpful, and hopefully you can share some of your knowledge as we go forward in the process. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to hand over to our first presenter, Dimo Kolovsky, for the presentation on STI policy instrument design. Dimo, please.
Interesting to see the Mentimeter results. So hopefully this presentation today will bring some light to this often obscure topic of what is a STI policy instrument as opposed to an STI policy. Is my slides visible? Yes. Can someone confirm?
Yes.
Yes, they are, Dimo.
Thank you. So today we will be discussing a number of issues. Let me get, okay. So in today's presentation, we will cover 7 elements. One is definitions of policy instruments, 2 types of policy instruments. We will take a look at policy instruments for STI. We will discuss STI policy instruments in support of SDGs. In this sense, we're going from the general to the specific. Then we will have a few words on policy instrument design process. We will note some pitfalls and risks in policy instrument design, and we will give a few examples of successful policy instruments for STI. All of my presentation is based on the handout. Hopefully you've received the link. Please download this and use it however you like. It is much more expansive in content than the actual presentation. The presentation is mostly highlights from this handout. Thank you. So definitions of policy instruments. A policy instrument is a tool or a mechanism used by governments or other organizations to implement their policies and achieve desired outcomes. These instruments are designed to guide or influence the behavior of individuals, businesses, or other entities in a way that aligns with policy objectives. Often a combination of different instruments is used to effectively address complex issues. This is what we call a policy mix. Some well-known academics in the field of public policy define policy instrument as the means by which governments attempt to achieve their policy objectives, or the use of information, legal, financial, and organizational resources to implement policy, or techniques or means for implementing public policy objectives. For references and reading on these various inputs and academic thinking on this issue of policy instruments, please see the references in the handout. You may explore this at your leisure. These definitions provide a foundational understanding of public policy instruments and highlight the diversity of tools available for policy implementation and the critical consideration involved in selecting and deploying these instruments effectively. Now, what are the types of policy instruments? We can develop a taxonomy in a couple of different ways. In theory, policy instruments for STI are designed in response to one or more types of failure and can be categorized as being designed to address these specific failures. The most talked about and common one is market failure. It was first recognized by the economist Bator in 1958. A market failure is a situation where, on their own, competitive markets fail at generating sufficient investment in science and technology. A second type of failure is systems failure, often described as underperformance of STI due to insufficient interactions among key stakeholders, meaning government, academia, firms and industry, civil society, etc. And finally, and most of the current discussions focus around transformative failure, which refers to two proximate but specific failures. The first is directionality failure, and it happens when an economy fails to develop a direction for transformative change in terms of addressing imperative societal needs and goals. It is often the result of an inability to develop a shared local or national or even global vision and coordinating mechanism aimed at the main socioeconomic challenges at hand. The current discussions on sustainable development goals and climate change at the COP meeting are an example of a directionality failure, and a very important and a huge one. The second is reflexivity failure, whereby a lack of continuous monitoring on the progress of STI-led development fails to provide inputs for adjusting policy and energizing policy learning. We will hear about monitoring and evaluation and learning in the last fourth session of this workshop. Another way to develop a categorization of policy instruments is by their more practical implementation side. So here we have usually regulatory instruments. They involve setting rules or standards that must be followed, often enforced through penalties for non-compliance. Economic instruments use market mechanisms to encourage desired behaviors, and examples are taxes, subsidies, tradable permits, or fees, as well as fiscal, monetary, trade, and other such policies. Informational instruments aim to change behavior through the dissemination of information and persuasion without the use of force or financial incentives, and include education, training, and capacity building. Voluntary or agreement-based instruments or public-private partnerships involve agreements between government and private parties to achieve certain goals without the need for formal regulation, such as voluntary standards for reducing waste, as one example. We have direct government provision or investment. This involves a direct provision of goods or services, investment in infrastructure, R&D funding, and technology development. We have national policies and strategies. Interesting is that sometimes the national STI policy will be at a level higher than the actual policy instrument, but in and of itself, it is yet another kind of policy instrument. They are critical instruments that link specific policy instruments to overall national development policy, ensuring a coherence through the policy work of a particular country. And then finally, we have international and regional strategies and networks. And given the necessary scale for policy intervention using specific policy instruments, some may be out of reach for specific countries such as small island developing states, but in joint action through regional strategies and networks, they may be achievable. Finally, there are other types of taxonomies for policy instruments, these developed by UN or other international organizations and agencies, or similar taxonomies of public policy and policy instruments. They may be categorized, for example, as long or short-term instruments, supply or demand-based instruments, sectoral or horizontal, meaning all of the economy, or addressing specific challenges such as one or more of the Sustainable Development Goals, or finally targeting specific stakeholders and groups. So that's how we dice and slice the types of policy instruments. The policy objective that these instruments serve will always be achieved through a policy instrument mix. So it's very rare that a single policy instrument will be used to achieve a single policy objective. And this is in fact the magic of policy will happen only when we have developed a good policy instrument mix. So I'm not going to go in detail because policy instruments for STI this is just a list of the most common ones. You may read about these in the actual handout. I'm sure most of these policies in the list ring some bells with all the participants today. Suffice to say that when possible policy instruments are discussed at the outset of an STI policy, funding is among the first suggested, and often to the detriment of other policy instruments. My experience in doing policy reviews and providing advisory services to various governments is that there's an over-focus on funding and grants. Often this is the only policy instrument that is attempted to use, and often it doesn't work quite so well because even though the funding and the reasoning and the project proposal and everything was set up, the funding does not always really materialize. So some words on STA policy instruments in support of SDGs. Addressing complex societal issues such as and challenges such as the SDGs requires the capacity to design and deploy many parallel interventions to address various aspects of SDGs challenges. STA policy specifically for the SDGs can draw from a wide range of policy instruments aiming to provide direct support to innovators and improving the enabling environment for innovation activities that contribute to sustainable development. If you go to the handout on page 6, there will be 2 pages of a list of specific STI policy instruments that address SDG issues. And this is a rather long list with some explanation of how they actually do this. Please consult the handout. A few words on the policy design process. Designing a policy instrument involves a systemic process that aims to ensure that the selected tool effectively addresses the policy problem and achieves the desired outcome. The design of a policy instrument should be evidence-based and inclusive and flexible to changing circumstance. An ideal process includes several key steps. The first is define the problem, clearly identify and understand the problem that needs to be addressed. This involves gathering data, consulting stakeholders, and analyzing the root causes and effects of the observed issue. Second one is to set clear objectives, establish specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound objectives for what the policy instrument is supposed to achieve. Three, analyze the context, meaning develop a clear picture of the national system of innovation, and also consider, this is really important, cultural, social, and political factors that may affect the policy instrument and its implementation. Four is identify options by generating a list of potential policy instruments that could be used in the policy mix to achieve the policy objectives. Assess the feasibility and impact and consider the economic, environmental, social, and political implications of each policy instrument. Here, one of the key concerns that we always have is that certain policy instruments may in fact do a lot of good for a certain stakeholder group, but not for another one. And then we, instead of solving a problem, we create friction among stakeholders. Six, select the instruments that will serve the policy goals, meaning create the actual mix. And seven, clearly a hugely important thing, is to design the implementation plan, which is as important as designing the instrument, meaning develop a detailed plan for implementing the chosen policy instrument or instruments, including timelines, responsible parties, resources required, and mechanisms for, again, monitoring and evaluation, which we'll discuss at greater length in session 4. This plan should also consider the need for capacity building and any legal or regulatory changes required. Now, some pitfalls. Of course, one has to have a risk-aware and a risk management approach to any kind of a policy instrument development. Despite careful planning, several pitfalls and risks can arise during the instrument design process. Understanding these challenges is crucial for the success of policy interventions. I have listed some of the main pitfalls and risks in the policy instrument design process. The first one is mismatch between instruments and objectives, and it occurs due to inadequate understanding of the problem, overly optimistic assumptions about the behavior of target groups, or lack of clarity about policy goals themselves. What I mean by this is that sometimes the goodwill to collaborate among various stakeholders is there at the meeting and during the process of the formulation of the policy instrument, but later on it tends to fade out. Two, underestimating implementation complexity includes underestimating the resources required, the time frame for seeing results, or the complexity of coordinating actions among various stakeholders. We'll hear more about these implementation issues tomorrow at a session devoted to STI policy instruments implementation. Three, neglecting stakeholder interest, especially if stakeholders have power to undermine the policy and if they perceive it as harmful to their own interests. So one must be keenly aware of the politics of the challenge at hand. Overlooking contextual factors, policy design without an understanding of socioeconomic, cultural, and political context. Insufficient flexibility, designing policy instruments that are too rigid to adapt to unforeseen challenges or shifts in the policy environment. Six, inadequate evaluation and feedback and learning mechanisms can lead to continued implementation of ineffective or inefficient policies. I have on many occasions seen policy instruments that go on for a decade without any proper evaluation of their effectiveness, and they just keep on going and going because even though there's a monitoring and evaluation process in place of some sort, it is not followed up by a policy learning process. Political and economic constraints, political realities such as changes in government, election cycles, or policy priorities, and economic conditions can also affect feasibility and sustainability of policy measures. This is a very important issue, in particular for countries that are commodity exporters, which prices tend to vary on the international markets. They get into a situation where they have a perspective of funding some STI policy instruments and programs. Then there's a downturn in the international price of the main commodity export of that particular country, and the policy instrument, and indeed the policy is scrapped or put on the shelf for better days. Risk of unintended consequences include unwanted negative impacts on certain groups, distortions in markets, or environmental side effects. Failing to anticipate and mitigate these risks can undermine the policy's overall effectiveness. So these are some of the pitfalls that we have seen in practice in doing the STI policy reviews and our advisory services. Some examples of successful policy instruments for STI would be South Korea's innovation policy technology development, Brazil's sector funds for S&T investments, Singapore's research, innovation, and enterprise plan development of technological capabilities, Finland's Business Finland funding and support for R&D and innovation, or India's National Innovation Fund, grassroots innovation and traditional knowledge. These particular policies and literature on these are to be found in the handbook. We do not have the time today to go into detail on these, but suffice to say that if you want to have a good secondhand experience about how these policies faced up to various challenges, please consult the literature and the links in the handout. So with this, I finish and I hand back to Pierre. Of course, I'm available for any questions during the Q&A session. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dimo. Very, very helpful. And thank you for the extra resources in your handout to be able to consult on STI policy development. I think that during my presentation, you did not see the full agenda of the session, so please consult the chat. There is a PDF document there that gives you the full agenda. And I'll be moving on to our second presenter today. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the third presenter. But this morning we have Dr. Diego Chavarro, a researcher specialized in science and technology policy studies. His work focuses on social impacts of scientific and technological advancements contributing to policy shaping Latin America, Africa, and Europe. Diego has collaborated with various institutions, including the European Commission, UN-IATT, Simon Fraser University. His recent research interests include artificial intelligence for sustainable development, the role of internationally mobile scientists in linking global research communities, open science practices and infrastructures, and research funding, design, and evaluation. So, Diego, I'm not sure if you can just turn on your camera and share your presentation.
Yeah, can you see me?
Very well, thank you. And
yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen here.
Thank you.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes, it's come up quite nicely. Go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Diego Chavarro, and together with Tommaso Charlie, we're here today to provide an overview of the evidence, thinking, and practice on designing and evaluating competitive research funding programs. The key objectives of this session are to provide an overview of what funders should systematically consider when designing and evaluating competitive research funding programs, and to provide an overview of how evaluation design should align with a funding program design. Our presentation is based on two forthcoming reports we've done for the IDRC on these topics. Sorry, yeah, she wanted some participation. Basically, the process of designing and evaluating research funding seems straightforward. Okay, it seems obvious, but there are often hidden complexities. For instance, what is the link between research inputs, outcomes, and intended impacts? What specific impacts should be the funding programs aim for? Scientific, societal, both objectives? Who gets to choose the objectives of the funding program? What time horizons should the funding program cover, etc.? So our work aimed to uncover some of this tacit knowledge that exists in the academic and grey literature, focusing on the key steps involved in funding and evaluation design. Let's start by looking at the key considerations for the design of research funding programs, whether the focus is on scientific impact or societal impact. So as you can see here, I mean, the literature considers that scientific and innovative impact is more related to advancing the career of researchers, building long-term research capacity, fostering international collaboration, all within, an academic environment, whereas societal impact is much more interested in policy formulation, improving the environment, and many other issues that are beyond the academic republic of science. So they are quite different. However, they have to be funded usually by the same funding organizations. So the funding organizations should take into account these two types of impact when designing their research programs. And what we tried to do was to look at the different steps that can be followed to design these funding programs and some of the differences when designing for scientific impact for societal impact. These are the stages of research funding design that we have found in the literature. As you can see, there are some differences between funding for scientific impact versus funding for societal impact. For instance, at the macro level, here, in scientific impact, funders need to choose the overall domain and stage of research they want to support. For example, basic versus applied research. But when looking at societal impact, when intending for societal impact, they also need to include the societal issues to be addressed and the social transformations that are expected. If you look at the proposal stage, there are differences too. For programs focused on societal impact, there is often more interaction between funders and applicants, with feedback and training provided in some cases. Not always, this is not the rule, but there are some cases in which feedback and training is provided. The proposal evaluation also considers different types of users and potential social impacts rather than just academic peer review. If you look at the post-award management, that's another step in which research funding design should look at. Post-award management also varies, with programs targeting societal impact requiring more support, monitoring, networking, and translational activities. So as you can see, we have this set of steps and trying to differentiate between what kind of things should be taken into account when aiming for scientific impact and societal impact. So now we're going to look at some of these steps that are key for us and that we would like to share with you in this short presentation. So in addition to those procedural differences, there are also key variables that need to be considered when designing research funding programs, regardless of the focus. So these are things that funders need to think about when designing their programs. One of those key variables found in the literature is the time horizon. Are we going to go for short-term, for mid-term, or long-term projects or programs? The target level, are we going to fund individuals, organizations, teams, projects? All of them have differences. What is the degree of uncertainty of the project that we're going to fund? Are we going to fund radical or incremental innovation? That will have an impact on the way that these projects will be evaluated, for instance, on the results that they are produced. And on the collaborations, are we going to fund mono collaborations, inter or transdisciplinary collaborations? All of them are different, require different skills from the researchers and from the funding organizations. So these things should be taken into account. Who are the beneficiaries? Are they only academics? Are they non-academics? Are they both? Depending on the beneficiaries, you would need also a different set of skills and probably support from the funding agencies to the researchers and collaboration and dialogues, etc. So the selection of these variables should be coherent with the macro objectives, with the specific priorities, and with conceptual models underpinning the funding program. For example, it's common to find expectations of long-term social impact from short-term projects aimed at scientific excellence. So funders would, would fund scientific excellence programs aimed at publications and patents, etc., expecting a societal impact change without getting that into the funding design. So in those cases, there could be a mismatch between what is expected and what is actually funded. Peer review. One key aspect of the funding design is the peer review process. As you can see here, what we try to do was in the literature, looking at what are the main stages for peer review. So we have these stages, they seem very, very obvious, but sometimes they're not. Eligibility screening, reviewer selection, peer review, panel review scoring, final decision, and feedback. But we also have challenges with the peer review. So for instance, ranking proposals of similar high quality, lack of evidence on the efficacy of peer review for predicting societal impact, unconscious biases in the review process, etc. The literature addresses some of these comments, of these challenges. For instance, they recommend avoid allowing researchers to suggest their own peer reviewers, implement double-blind review of proposals, and consider the use of lotteries or other mechanisms to select between similarly high-quality proposals. The post-hardware management activities are also crucial, requiring support, monitoring, networking, and translational activities, especially for programs targeting societal impact. In summary, the design of research funding programs requires carefully considering a range of variables and procedural elements tailored to the specific goals and priorities. So at this point, I would like to ask you specifically about the societal impact part of this funding design. And I would like you to go to think about this question, which will appear in a Mentimeter regarding societal impact. According to your perception, to what extent researchers in your country possess the skills to engage in social impact work with non-academic communities? A, to a great extent, or B, there is a lack of skills. Please think about it, and if you can go to the Mentimeter, please scan the QR code or just go to the link that is going to be shared with you, and please help us to understand your perception on this. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we got like 50 responses. 80% think that there is a lack of skills. This is in accordance to the literature. Actually, there is a huge challenge that is documented in different research papers about the lack of skills of researchers to engage in societal impact. And this is a big challenge when you design funding programs for research impact. How can I make or help impact, the societal impact to happen? And what could be done in order to increase the researchers' skills to interact with the communities that they are targeting? Not only that, how can you create spaces for dialogues and to make research more impactful? This is something that is not commonly addressed in research funding programs, because most of the agencies provide the funding, but then they do not follow up and they do not engage with the research process so that the societal impact is achieved. So 80-20, yeah. So it's very in line with the literature.
You may need to reshare
okay.
your
Yeah, I have to
slide.
reshare. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, can you see my screen now?
We're seeing the presentation part or the slide notes part of it.
Yeah.
We're not seeing.
Okay. So now let's turn.
Can you switch to the other screen to allow us to see us in full view?
Let me see. Just give me a second.
Okay. That's better. Good.
Okay, thank you. So now let's turn to the evaluation design. The key features to consider include reflecting on the research context and how it affects program, identifying the most relevant intended uses of the evaluation, such as advocacy, accountability, or analysis, engaging with diverse stakeholders early on the evaluation design, choosing appropriate conceptual models to link research to impact, selecting a mix of quantitative, qualitative, and mixed methods, defining relevant indicators, both standard and customized, anticipating and addressing ethical issues. But what are the steps? So the main steps in designing the evaluation include, these are probably not in order, but these are different things that have to be done. So one important thing is to align the research funding with the program design. And also assessing, of course, what are the key impacts expected, defining the evaluation aims based on the design, so that there is a match between the funding design and the evaluation design, and ensuring that, of course, adequate data is available, not asking questions that can't be answered, building appropriate indicators, and analyzing the impacts of the funded research. And we wanted to provide, the users with a tool, kind of instrument to use in the design of research for impact. So the idea is to allow a designer, a policy designer, to match the funding design with the evaluation design at the design phase, because evaluations are usually done at the end of the design, at the end of the funding program, and we would like to to suggest that this should be done at the beginning. So this is just an example of a matrix that you could develop with the steps that we have explained here. And what you could do is, on the left hand, you could put the funding design, and on the right hand, you could put the evaluation design and try to see how they could match. So let's look at this program, which is an actual program. This is an ARC program in which we did an evaluation, and we tried to see how the evaluation matched somehow the funding design. So in terms of the context of the research, this is an ARC program, so it happens in Europe. We consider it's in a stable region with capacity to do world-leading research. So the evaluation design should assess the extent to which the funded research produces scientific outputs used by other scientists, contributing to scientific leadership, given that this is a very capable region. What kinds of conceptual models were used? We identified these two conceptual understandings, which are basically the logical framework. It shows basically the transformation of inputs into outputs. So we consider the inputs that are transformed into outputs. For instance, how the funding is transformed into increase or improvement in researchers' careers, etc. And this is just to give you a gist of how you could use what we have just seen to design your program from the funding and evaluation at the beginning. And hopefully this will be useful for you to design your own competitive research funding programs. Considering the key features, we're not giving you a set of prescriptions, but things to be considered in the evaluation, and hopefully design the evaluation of science programs in line with your macro aims, so scientific impact or societal impact, and your specific priorities. So yeah, thanks a lot, and any questions will be addressed later.
Thank you very much, Diego. Very helpful. Yes, we have one last presentation before our Q&A, so please hold your questions or provide them in the chat. We're ready to go with a presentation from Alessandro Bello. And let me just get Alessandro's bio here. He has extensive experience in STI policy development and gender equality in STEM subjects, and over 15 years of international experience, management coordination and program implementation. He's worked in over 40 countries, including with UNESCO, UN Women, OACPS, governments and development agencies across the world. And since 2020, Alessandro is part of the Technical Assistance Unit supporting the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States and implementation of the OACPS Research and Innovation Program. And he's leading the policy support facility in these ACP countries. So Alessandro, please go ahead. Are you able to share your slides?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. Let me share my screen. Please let me know when you can see the screen.
Yes, it's coming up. You'll have to put it, yeah, there you go, in full slide mode. Good, thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Pierre. And again, good afternoon to everyone. I'm going to provide a bit of brief insight on we're going from the program that we're presenting, PRIM research programs, to a more micro level on building a dedicating national research and innovation funding mechanism. So I'm going to provide a very brief overview insight on why do we need them, and share some lessons learned from the implementation of the OACPS Research Innovation Policy Support Facility, which is a part of OACPS Research Innovation Program implemented by the Secretariat of the Organization of African, Caribbean, Pacific States and funded by the European Union, and particularly the lessons learned from a handbook on building research innovation funding mechanism, which is under development and has knowledge from around 20 countries in lesson learned on building dedicated national research innovation funding mechanisms. So very briefly, what do we mean when we're referring on our side on R&I funding mechanism? Well, we are broadly defined to include agency type of organizations and also funds of funds that are used by country to mobilize, provide, or deliver financial resources for scientific research and also innovation activities. And some common characteristics among them is they have an impact on the national research and innovation ecosystems and also budget. And they are usually primarily funded through national public funding. There are different type. There are some that are focused on the RR, such as on research, others that are focused on innovation, and others that might be focused on both research and innovation. Just taking a couple of examples around the world. For instance, if we think of the National Research and Innovation Agency of Indonesia, or if we look at Kenya, for instance, where they have a specific national research fund for research, and then a Kenya National Innovation Agency focused on innovation. But why do we need them? Well, what we have analyzed, what we have seen looking ahead or different of them is that really they play a role in increasing funding and channel also funding for research and innovation. They encourage the creation and development of innovative companies. They promote cutting-edge research in area of strategic importance to national competitiveness, and they stimulate employment and economic growth through innovation and commercialization of the results and outputs of research and development. But they also contribute to strengthening country position on international stage, and maybe also putting them as a hub of innovation and technological hub. And of course, they are catalyst for attracting foreign direct investment, creating also favorable research innovation ecosystems to attract even more investors. But we need also because we need an entrepreneurial state, the sense to tackle high-risk capital-intensive initiatives that are often left out and unaddressed by market-led private sector players. So we need to go beyond the usual one of fixing market failures, where the public sector needs to take an active role in shaping and creating markets. And especially, they're important because in most countries, there is a lack of funding. There is a lack of, and this gap is even widening between policies and practices. And this has basically, as a result, has increased the dependence of national researchers on international research funding, and they're responsive to the international agenda, basically rather than tied to national priorities. That's why, again, it's very important to have this type of setup of this type of mechanisms. And also, innovation agency can be a powerful tool for policymakers to facilitate the transition to clean innovation, meeting new industrial needs or providing patient capital that are basically long-term investment in the form of debt of equity for high-risk, high-return technology that have not yet found market support. Just an example of some in the regions of this type of R&I funding mechanism, such as in Hong Kong, the Innovation Technology Fund, in Singapore, the National Research Foundation, in Korea, the NRF, in Malaysia, the agency Inovasi Malaysia, sorry for my pronunciation, in Vietnam, the National Technology Innovation Fund, and in Indonesia, the National Research Innovation Agency. As you can see, there is a growing attention, though some of them, such as the BRIN in Indonesia and the Korea, emerged as merged of previous existing agencies, but you can clearly see that they're growing on attentions and the new also, let's say, type of objectives. And this is also happening, as always, we always see in our program, the African, Caribbean, Pacific. So the same is happening also in Africa. These funding, research and innovation mechanisms are growing attentions, and there are new setting up of them in new countries all the time. So when we have analyzed the situation and this funding mechanism in different countries, we have come up with let's say 8 steps on how to develop on one side, setting up, and then implement, which are 2 different things, of course, this type of mechanism. And though maybe some countries have roadmap or planning process, they're not uniform in terms of methodology. And of course, everything depends on the level or R&I maturity of the countries. But in any case, we have seen that there are they need this kind of 8 steps for setting up and implementing. So first of all, building political and public constituencies, then feasibility studies and its assessment, then cabinet approval, develop legislative instruments, setting up governing structures, and establish the secretariat, and also operationalize the mechanism itself and first develop funding instruments and then operationalize the mechanism. In this presentation, considering the time that I have available, I only give you a bit more details about the first 2 steps. But if you're interested, once we have developed the full handbook, we will be happy to share it with all of you. It will contain a lot of information, lesson learned in each of these steps. So one of the important is these political and public constituencies. So from the very beginning, what we need is to secure political support and political buy-in. And this is very important. Step 1, to have all different stakeholders engagement to also understand their needs, of course, but not only, but also the civil society involvement. I would say the quadruple helix in that sense, all the critical stakeholders from the government, academia, private sector, and civil society. We need to raise awareness in this part. And it's very important, the role of champions and advocates. I think that it was mentioned also before, we need from the very beginning the stakeholders' support and engagement. And just to make you some examples in these, for instance, think of the role of the president in Indonesia, in the establishment of the BRIN, or in Kenya, the role that members of parliaments with scientific backgrounds play in the enactment of the National Science, Technology, Innovation Act, which then created the National Research Fund and the Kenya National Innovation Agencies. And they were also supported by non-governmental organizations such as the African Center for Technology Studies or the African Technology Policy Studies Network. So here, what we usually, when we work with countries, what we usually also do from the very beginning is to engage also members of parliaments with specific activities. So because there are going to be laws that are going to be approved, so you need to engage them, make them aware from the very beginning, and make them one of the champions and advocates for the needs for these R&I funding mechanisms. Another very important part is that we need an assessment of the research and innovation needs. A feasibility studies that understands where these fund mechanisms should operate, making sure that, of course, it's aligned with the national development agenda. This is what we were also saying at the very beginning. The national mechanism needs to respond to critical needs from the countries. It's very important is that R&I is cross-cutting. So we need the setting up of what we call national interinstitutional committees that are created, made by, composed by different key stakeholders within the R&I ecosystems. It's also possible, of course, to do R&I foresight studies and also forecasting and technology assessment. But in this part, it's also important to understand the mission, what is the specific problems and needs that needs to be solved, which type of beneficiaries should the agency support further its mission in terms of management, what type of autonomy. And this is very important in the sense there is always these discussions about autonomy and embeddedness in the sense that the effect that close linkages between innovation agency and public-private sector can have in institutional autonomy, and the impact this can have on the balance between urgent policy implementation goals and more emergent and perhaps radical long-term innovations. But also on the practical terms, which kind of instrument support they need to provide. And also, it's not something trivial, but in this, it's something that it's explored. It's the affiliation, where these agency fund mechanisms should be based. And for instance, just to make you an example in the region, it might be within the department within the Prime Minister Officer, such as the case of the National Research Foundation in Singapore, or might be affiliated with the ministry in charge of science, technology, innovation, such as the Vietnam. Now, well, yes, something that other lessons learned that we have seen, and this goes through all the steps that we have developed to the implementing, to setting up and implementing a funding mechanism. First, it's as we say, we need strengthen and secure political support from the very beginning. We need to ensure sustainable funding in order to make sure that these funding mechanisms, they do not just last a few years and they do not have sources for implementing. And we need to boost private sector engagement. What we usually do when we work with the countries, and that was, for instance, the examples of what we've done also in Togo or Gambia in Africa, is from the very beginning, we engage the private sectors, such as it might be the Chamber of Commerce or other key actors within the private sectors. We need to avoid that these mechanisms are highly and heavily depending only on external sources of funding. That it's because international partners, then can change priorities, and this will affect directly the fund, the program, the fund, or the agency working itself. And we need to develop core capacities in terms of human capital, in terms of infrastructures, governance, financial, social capital, and partnerships. And we have to develop technical and managerial expertise. This it's usually also done through, we need the capacity buildings in terms of not capacity building, capacity utilization, and capacity retentions. And of course, to understand the type of then instruments that is going to, programs that is going to implement it by the mechanism, we need to enhance outcome and impact assessment capacities. And something that it's very much also important, it's from the very beginning to the establishment of monitoring and evaluation learning platforms. We need to understand, we need to evaluate, to then readjust maybe some of the function of this type of mechanism. And again,
Alessandro, are you close to finished?
Yes. That's sorry. Apologize. I'm going to finish here. And again, if you are interested, we can, once it's finished, we can share this handbook, which contains these and much more information and lessons. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Alessandro. Sorry for cutting you short there. We are a little over time, so I did want to give a full 10 minutes for questions and answers. I've been seeing a good discussion going on in the chat with Diego. I don't know if Diego, if you wanted to come on for maybe a couple of minutes just to explain the responses that you've been giving to SUNY.
Yes, thank you very much. So it seemed that there was another question and I didn't answer it, but I call it now. Please, to what extent do you think the publish or perish slogan among the academics affect the social impact of research funding program? I think it affects it a lot. Yeah. Basically, these are, as I mentioned, these are two different ways of looking at research, whether it's scientific impact or societal impact. The publish or perish culture comes from the scientific impact, right? And of course, that requires a lot of energy and investment, which deters the societal impact of research. So I would say if a funding organization is aiming for societal impact, then their evaluation has to reflect that aims. So researchers shouldn't be evaluated on the number of publications if the aim is societal impact, right? But this usually happens. I know the question is quite interesting because many funding research organizations evaluate researchers on the basis of scientific impact, even if their aim is societal. And this creates confusion, this creates this culture of the publish or perish, etc. So yeah, just be coherent with the aims. If you're a funding organization aiming for societal impact, evaluate in that sense. And the other question was on what can you do if an important stakeholder is prohibited by law, right? Banned by law. Yes, if you are a public organization, there is very little you can do. I mean, you cannot break the law, but what you can do, if you think this actor is very important for the ecosystem, then you have to, to motivate the discussion about why this actor is important, why this stakeholder should be there, and mobilize, the mechanisms, the legal mechanisms that are available in your country, so that this actor is included. And of course, the mechanisms are varied. Some of them include collaboration with other ministries or other governmental agencies, debates, also inviting, probably, if it can be done, this community to, to speak up, to give them a voice, etc., so that they are included in the law. But without being included in the law, it's very difficult to provide support for them.
Okay, thank you, Diego. Maruf is also raising a hand. Maruf, did you want to come in on that particular question as well? Did that answer?
Thank you very much.
Please, I think you can unmute yourself.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yep.
The question is, first of all, thank you very much, Diego, for that beautiful answer. I think that's really nice. I think that's probably what needs to happen. But the second question I'm trying to raise is following up on what you just said now. In many instances, what usually happens is this particular stakeholder will come up again with another funding, mechanism whereby they try to address their own particular issue. But meanwhile, they could have just come under the initial funding mechanisms and be taken care of. So they now come up again, formalized agreement on another entirely new, funding mechanisms. How do you begin in your experience? I don't know whether you've had that experience before. How do you begin to, navigate those two mechanisms? Will it be a good way to find some common grounds whereby those two stakeholders could come together, or do you think it's also fine for them to just go, and establish a completely new, funding mechanisms just to address,
Okay.
their issue?
So,
Thank you.
what I think is to establish a new mechanism, you need these stakeholders to be enabled to participate. So still you need a change in the law, because if you say they are banned, you cannot produce new mechanisms for these stakeholders. So still you need to push for a change in the law so that they are included. Once they are included, then you can produce mechanisms for them. But if they are not even included, it's very difficult if you are from a public organization, I would say.
Okay, thank you, Diego.
Thank you.
I have a question for Alessandro, and then I'll come to Dr. Mirza. Alessandro, is there any guidance towards creating entrepreneurial states? And is this guidance crucial as this creates local ownership, engagement, and accountability?
Thank you for this question. Actually, it's a very critical one, in the sense that there is no specific guidance, but some suggestions are, of course, always we need from the very beginning also to have build the awareness within the government itself of the role that the state will play, that we need them to take high risk, capital intensive initiatives, all those that cannot be funded by the private sector. And also, again, to try to have this holistic approach, to have the private sector also joining some efforts from the very beginning. But it's really a shift on mentality, and that's why there is a new funding mechanism that are being implemented, or responding also to new challenges in this sense. There are no yet, I'm not aware, what would be very interesting to have though specific guidelines that should be followed by government to creating more entrepreneurial states in that sense.
Okay, thank you, Alessandro. And Dr. Mirza Habib Ali, do you have a question for us?
Thank you. I have a question from Diego. Most of the time, the funding agencies depend upon the peer review, and the scientists who do the peer review. Uh, Funding agencies are dependent on report of those reviewers, and sometimes those review reports or reviewers, they are not totally aware of how to how the impact of the funding or research would be on the society. So just I would like to know that how we can overcome this problem, that the review reports are are actually are achieved or received in a way that they ensure that the research funding is having impact on the society?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because the literature, what the literature says is that peer review is very bad at predicting societal impact. So, it seems that academics are not very good at predicting the societal impact of the research when they review proposals. So what has been done, some exercises we know have been done including those targeted populations in the review process. So there will be a peer review by the scientist, but there will be another relevance review or kind of different review from the impacted population, for instance. So one mechanism could be including, if there is a targeted population, then including that population in the peer review process, but not as a technical peer review, but more as a relevance peer review process would be important. Also, from the funding design, you could also include like a clause that researchers could not submit proposals that do not include their targeted population, so as to ensure that the proposals are co-constructed. Now, that's easier said than done, because, as we said, and you mentioned, researchers lack skills for societal impact, which means they lack skills for transdisciplinary dialogues. So this is something that the funding agency can also support. We know that researchers have problems in translating their language to the targeted communities. So how can the research funder provide a space for this dialogue so that the proposal is constructed? One idea could be you could fund some of the proposals, give little funding so that these dialogues are established, and some training also, so that this happens more robustly before receiving the proposal. In some cases, there are actually two phases. So in the first phase, researchers submit a proposal, but then there is feedback, and then they produce a second version of the proposal. The feedback could include, you need to strengthen this part of the societal impact. We're not seeing the community involved here, and so there will be two phases of the peer review process. And it's ideas. There could be many ideas, but the main purpose would be to include those targeted as well in the co-construction of the proposal, and probably also thinking about including them in the evaluation process.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Diego. I have one more question from Elrade for Alessandro. It's in the chat. Alessandro, could you please take some time to try and answer that in written form, because we have to move on. I have now a presentation from Fernando. Fernando Santiago is an industrial policy officer at UNIDO, where he specializes in policy advisory services on industrial policy to member states. And I'm wondering, Fernando, if you are able to turn on your camera and your microphone and be able to give us your presentation. Are you still there, Fernando?
I'm here. Thank you. So can you see the screen now, the presentation?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Pierre and colleagues. Good morning from Vienna. Good afternoon, good evening for you in Asia, right? So let's see, this is, something that follows from also nicely from the presentation by Dino on the fact that, many times what we see in most of the instruments that people are considering to support STI activities are funding, either research funds or some kind of grants, which in a way imply the search for supply, sort of the production of the knowledge production and dissemination, and have already some embedded targets and things. But it really is about the creation of knowledge and how to target some of the government support into areas where those knowledge pieces could be interested. But in fact, the challenge here is that science and technology, as well as a sort of an activity, requires to close the loop. Yeah, someone is supposed to use the knowledge, or expected to use the knowledge. We are talking now in the previous presentations about pertinence, about societal impact, and that requires really. So once the knowledge is produced and mobilized, who is going to use it, how it's going to be used, and so that's a dimension that many times people don't understand or don't consider as a relevant area where the public policy can have an impact, right? So in a way, we're thinking here also, what is the demand? I mean, if you link on these sort of linear models, sometimes we call it the supply, but also the demand. So who is requiring the knowledge? So in a way, there is a need to address by researchers. And so where is that? How can we stimulate those things? And so in a way, it becomes two sides of the same coin. Yeah. And then, of course, there are some ways of understanding these things. Many people think of procurement, but I want to show you there is a bit more than that. Right? So there is really now, for example, the intention to understand that if we think of knowledge production as a sort of a market, of course, it's not necessarily to be oversimplistic in terms of all market dimension, but when we talk about market failures, and the reason there is because we talk about sort of kind of supply that needs to have a demand side as well, yeah, in sort of very economic principles. And of course, for anybody who is, in these things, studying basic economics of innovation, we understand R&D as the sort of the process to support knowledge creation, right? But also, once the innovation to become an innovation, it needs to go through some kind of filtering in the market, we say, right? So where is the value of that research for the society or for the companies, right? And so, but also there is competition here in the market, and that creates a selection mechanism. So the research areas that are most relevant are going to be picked up for the market. Of course, sometimes this is not the case, and governments need to intervene, right? When it's, for example, a public interest in health, for example, yeah, you need to also create that sort of demand so that researchers have the incentive to move into those areas. And what we see increasingly in the current context is that, with the sort of changes in sort of the balancing of power, geopolitics, and even after the pandemics, and how the countries are now rethinking on their industrial processes, for example, there is the idea of how can we become more competitive. And you look at some of the initiatives in the US or China or Europe, there is, of course, an idea to reindustrialize, to strengthen the industry, but also understanding that reindustrialization or strengthening the competitiveness, it's connected very strongly to research and development or to technology capacity, right? So, if we want to diversify, we need to do something internally, which will imply some directionality and some demands on our research communities. Of course, all these ideas about strategic autonomy that are all sort of the context now. And then, of course, what many of these governments see, for example, even if you think about the greening of the economy, is that changing the consumer habits. So the consumers are sort of the change agents that are going to drive the demand and sort of create the incentive and space for research, for STI activities to also move into this direction. So so all these things that you can see now in the sort of changing world with rebalancing of powers and economic powers, it's really creating sort of a different way of understanding how we create knowledge, but also where do we use the knowledge and how is it used. So this creates, for example, maybe a question for you to reflect on: what does it mean in terms of policy coordination? What does it mean in terms of scientific collaboration? What does it mean in terms of creating the space for example, regional processes where the demand, for example, you can see, remember the pandemic in some of the Asian countries, and coming together to procure things in Africa the same. So you need knowledge, you need to address a need, and then you also think that in a collaborative way, this is a way to proceed. Yeah, but just to make sure that the emphasis is in understanding that the demand for knowledge and for technology creates a space for public intervention or public initiative, right? But there are just the way Dimo tried to present some of the instruments, how to categorize. There are many different ways, and some of them don't look like that they are really on STI, because they are more of sort of what we saw, the targeting framework conditions. So where is the government's putting the bids for economic development is going to create incentives for research. Right? So when we talk about directionality, many times is because the government has identified, for example, there are priorities in health or in agriculture, for example, food security, then of course that we will create certain areas. But they can also be more on the sort of what we call horizontal conditions, right? So we just need to have framework conditions for industries to flourish, for researchers to operate, and that's it. I will show you some examples, but this is some of the sort of the framework conditions for research, because research doesn't happen in a vacuum. There's a context, and Dimo was very clear on presenting those things. But in some cases, the government can be even much more active, right? So the government can act as a player that steers demand in a very specific direction, in a very specific area, or in very specific technologies, right? So the government, as you think of public procurement, would think of, you will be a consumer, and that's a very strong incentive for STI activities. The government is providing the initial demand. If you think of the developments in Brazil, Embraer, or China, the government is creating the incentives for researchers or for companies to move in a market where maybe there is a strong uncertainty for success, so there is a strong competition, so entering is very hard. But the government is providing that space for companies to learn, right? So that's a procurement, but also it can be through regulation or providing. Let me show you some of these examples. And then this is really my last slide, but it's really the one where I would spend a little bit more time. In the sense of, in some cases, when we talk about framework conditions, we can understand three main kinds of activities, right? How they take shape, that's a different thing in terms of concrete cases and how the governments will introduce these things. For example, many countries have this idea, of course, industrializing and technological upgrading. And so what Dimo mentioned about market failures, the government will try to address those by investing on, for example, human capital or sort of credits to incentivize foreign direct investment. The idea is that this foreign direct investment will attract technologies and create some learning processes whereby the local companies will start acquiring the technology and acquiring the knowledge to sort of, particularly in the process of upgrading, will be important to attract this technology, but also promoting exports, because that creates an incentive for companies to capture markets where the complexity of the knowledge perhaps will be increasingly more important. So we all talk about the experience, of course, in the region where you are, Japan, Korea, where the export orientation created the incentives for the companies to increasingly gain into the sort of technological complexity and the products and technologies that they produce, right? So this is really a sort of a way to set a framework condition for the market or for the companies to develop, right? In some cases, the government, of course, can be a partner in this process because, protecting certain industries, creating some research centers where, some of the knowledge will supplement, will actually create some basis for the initial activities of companies, sort of creating this sort of symbiotic relationship between government institutes and companies that need to create some new technology. So this is somehow, serving the purpose of maybe addressing certain particular needs, right? One of the things that are very interesting, and some of the governments have been trying have been in the past, is, this foresight and market intelligence. Many of the companies, particularly if you think of SMEs, these companies may not have the skills or the methodologies to understand what's happening in the market, how to read the signals in the market in terms of where the technologies are, where the potential technological partners are. So that the government takes the role of creating specialized entities. One of the things that I've seen, for example, in Argentina, where the government created specific programs to create the space for for specific sector, specific technologies, so companies have access to a window where they can start conversation with experts and learn about the technology. So that's an important dimension that sometimes we don't think. It's just providing information on where the market trends are moving. But as I said, in some other cases, the demand can be a variable where the government acts more actively. Yeah, for example, in a way that if you think of now issues around greening or sort of more environmental friendly products, what is the government's role is sometimes through some awareness raising campaign, creating the space, for example, if you think of these technology awards or awards for companies that fulfill certain requirements in terms of quality, technology standards, so that in a way you create in the view of the consumers, you create this space where these companies are excellent companies, and these are the companies that we need to support in terms of consuming the products. So in that way, national brands, national champions. Yeah. So these companies, the government takes a role in terms of supporting specific companies, specific sector-specific products, and that creates an incentive for certain activities to take place. Yeah. Something that we, of course, look at very, very frequently is the government through regulations, right? Through regulations, you can create specific consumption. For example, certain products that are, for example, now I remember in my country, for example, in Mexico, you have a very strong health problem because people are consuming a lot of sugar. And so now the government is saying, okay, you have to have a specific label where you have some, warning to the consumer that, this can hamper your health, right? But also you can have some subsidies, and you can have some fiscal incentives for specific companies. For example, these happen as well also in China, for example. We know with all this support to the electric vehicles, it was all that I mentioned where the government was supporting the development of the technologies, but also supporting and motivating the consumers to acquire those cars because they're supposed to be more environmental friendly, but also because even though there was a price difference, so the government was willing to provide some kind of incentives by trying to bring together the prices, right? So that the incentive for the consumer is higher. But of course, in certain cases, as I mentioned, standards and labels that are for applied to the products. In some cases, as well, the government, as we have seen, for example, as I mentioned, the cases of Brazil or China, where you have this ambition to create an aerospace industry or aeronautics industry, and then the government goes very heavily acting side by side with the companies in sort of providing not only grants and subsidies, but also mobilizing some of the actual doing of the technologies. And so this creates a space for very high risk, very long-term activities, and that's where governments can play a very important role in facilitating this sort of learning curve for the companies. And something that, of course, Dimo will talk about a bit later on the public procurement. But this is not just public procurement in terms of buying products and large amounts or large quantities. This is also playing with the fact that now it's not so much of deciding on the product, but it's on deciding on the needs. So we have a problem and we need to have a solution. And so for you as a company, now becomes the challenge is not to make sure that you deliver the product, but is that you deliver a solution. And in this case, what it happens is that the technologies or the products are not so well specified. So it's up to the companies, of course, to come up with those ideas. And so the idea of public procurement becomes a more strategic endeavor, right? So as we are talking about a strategic public procurement, where in some cases it's about a technology or it's about a societal need, right? So again, as we were seeing earlier, how to balance between research goals and also societal goals. This is also a way in the way that government as a consumer entity can mobilize knowledge in a direction. Right? So I'm not going to stop here in the sense of providing some final comments in terms of understanding the importance of considering supply and demand as two sides that need to be mobilized in directing the scientific and technological endeavors. These demands can be connected to science and technology, but also to larger goals in terms of societal challenges and economic development goals. Of course, this policy instrument depends on what is the desired role for the government and how the government would like to intervene and how intensive. Yeah, and so this is where I would stop, and just maybe if you have any other comment or question, I would be happy to address. Thank you, Pierre.
Thank you, Fernando. And this is a very good opportunity to move now to the country example for Malaysia. And I would like to invite Associate Professor, Dr. Noor Ashikin Mohammed Yusuf. Dr. Ashikin, are you, Professor Ashikin, are you available to us? Thank you. And I think one of my colleagues is going to share the slides.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. It's 6 o'clock here, but never mind. Can I just proceed? Right. Okay. This is a very simple example about the experience of Malaysia in designing the national biotechnology law in pursuance of the adoption of Article 27 of TRIPS document. So let us next go to the next slide, please. Okay, my presentation will be divided into 6 sections. I will introduce you first about the backgrounds of this, the National Biotechnology Law, how it came into being, and then I would give you some examples. So those who are not familiar with the TRIPS obligation, what are those requirements that is required of Malaysia as a member country and signatory country to the World Trade Organization or WTO? And then what are the legal processes in adopting an international document into making it as a domestic or national law? And then how did we do it? And there are certain issues and problems that Malaysia encountered, and how did we overcome that one? And then the second last would be the types of instrument that Malaysia chose in ensuring that the requirements of the international requirements of TRIPS are actually embedded at domestic level in the law, in the form of law document. And then what are the decisions of Malaysian government? Okay, next. It will be simple. Okay, let me just explain to you the long history about how the biotechnology law came into being, because biotechnology law is actually a very new phenomenon in Malaysia. It came into being only in the year 1998 at national level or international level, especially like in the United States. They have already their national biotechnology law as early as in 1984 with the case, due to the case of Chakrabarti and Diamond. I think if you type the case of Chakrabarti and Diamond, you can find that is actually the landmark case that triggers the launching and the enactment of biotechnology law all over the world. So in Malaysia, we already have a patent law back in 1993. This is not actually, so I would consider that our patent law or IP law in Malaysia is relatively young, because even though we draw the provisions from the British law, but ours is much later, only 20 years later, as compared to UK. UK have a much earlier versions of patent law. And then in 1998, there is a global change in, I think, not only in Malaysia, but also to other countries, the rest of the world, when WTO, the World Trade Organization, came into being. WTO actually replaces a General Agreement on Trade and Tariff, the GATT, in 1964 and 1948 document. So then one of the documents, 13 documents of WTO is actually TRIPS. I would refer to you later on what are the TRIPS. And then because of this, as a requirement, as a condition to become a member country to WTO, Malaysia has to accept also the TRIPS document, which contain Article 27, which actually specifically the article that we're going to talk about for the rest of my presentation. And then because of this, in 2005, we launched the National Biotechnology Policy, 2005. And then only in 2005, also after the launching of the biotechnology policy, the Malaysian Parliament managed to secure enough vote for an agreement to amend the existing Patent Act 1983. So you can see that this is actually a very long history. It takes few years for Malaysia to finally have a biotechnology law. So this is again, Patent Act is of course in terms of academic terms, the patent law is actually a legal document, whereas the National Biotechnology Policy is a policy document. So we have both documents coming into Malaysia almost at the same time. And I show you how it becomes a problem later on. Okay, next please. Okay, this is actually for those who are not familiar with WTO or TRIPS document. TRIPS actually refers to, is a short name or acronym name for this document, important document. It's about intellectual property rights. It's actually, the full name of TRIPS is actually Agreement on Trade Related Aspect of Intellectual Property Rights, or short name TRIPS. And then as a member country, as a signatory country to TRIPS, we have the obligation, Malaysia has an international obligation to actually adopt and then actually implement the requirements of TRIPS at domestic level. One of the articles that is related to this, my presentation, is, like I said just now, is Article 27, whereby TRIPS actually referring to biotechnology. If you look at Article 27 of TRIPS, TRIPS does not specifically mention about biotechnology law, because Article 27 of TRIPS just says that any invention. So any invention. So since biotechnology is actually an invention, so constructively it becomes something that Malaysia has to protect. So because TRIPS is actually mandatory, so Malaysia also have to, without not much choice, Malaysia have to give the legal protection to a biotechnological invention. Next. So these are actually the processes about processes that is required in integrating TRIPS into domestic law to make sure that the provisions of Article 27 become parts of Malaysian law. So this is actually, as you can see, that first you have to become, it has to be mandated at international level, at this case at WTO and also TRIPS, and then you have to bring it at to the second tier at the domestic level. We have to present it, and then we have to present the bill so that the bill can be debated at the parliament, and then it should be, if it gets enough vote, then only then it becomes part of the Malaysian, it becomes part of the federal government. In Malaysia, technology and intellectual property is actually provided for, is stated in section 12 of the federal list of the federal constitution. Federal constitution is regarded as the supreme law of the country, so it gives the right to the federal government to deal and to address, to handle all the matters regarding technology and also by IP. So in this case, it is the prerogative of the federal government to pass the law on biotechnology, and also on, since biotechnology is also intellectual property, so it gives the whole power or authority, legal power, to the federal government and the legislative body to pass the law. So, and then once it is done that, once it get done that, and then in order to implement the law at the ministerial level, the power will be cascaded to the ministry, and then in this case, the ministry that is given the right to become the custodian of this act is actually the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation, or in short, MOSTI. So MOSTI has the right to actually, and after that, issue the rules and regulation for the detailed administration or the detailed governance of the act. And then, okay, next one is at organization level. This becomes like any research institute or any university that dealing with biotechnology, they can then have the liberty to come up with their various guidelines, standard operation procedures, or action plan to operationalize and implement the biotechnology law and regulations. So next, so that is the processes that we need to go through in Malaysia before the requirements of Article 27 of TRIPS become national law. So in this case, we have several issues. I've listed here 3 issues. So first and foremost, we need to identify what is actually the status of TRIPS as a document. Is TRIPS a policy document or is it a legal document? This is a very pertinent question in the sense that it is simple, but it's very pertinent because if it's a policy document, then it doesn't need to go through the legal processes like presenting and tabling the biotechnology bill at the parliamentary level. It can be done at a ministerial level. So vice versa. If it's considered as a policy document, so all we need is just that for the minister just to make an announcement or issue a policy statement saying that, okay, the requirement of TRIPS would be accepted by Malaysia and becomes a Malaysian policy. So we need to do that because we need to identify and solve this issue first, because policy has a different objective, and so it's a legal document, and then the body that is responsible in issuing or developing this document will be two totally different bodies, and so are the processes. Whereas the legal process is, I think, known to everyone, is more difficult to get. Because in the case of Malaysia, we need to get to become a law, the bill needs to secure actually a simple majority. That is, in the case of Malaysia, we need to get at least the number is 114 votes out of the existing House of Representatives. So that is actually a lot of votes to get. So these are the processes. And the second issue is that, next please. The second issue is that which one comes first? Is it because that's why we need to know in normal case which one comes first? Is it a policy? Should a policy come first, or should a law come first? So, and then there's another question people ask: which one is easier? And then is policy easier? Is it easier to do a policy first, or is it easier to do a law first? And then the third one is that what do you do when there is no law? Sorry, can we go back to the previous slide? Yes. What do we do when there is a law document in existence but there is no national policy, or there is a national policy in existence but there is no law? So that it will be a vacuum in the thing. So how do we bridge this kind of thing? So these are the issues also that we need to address in the case of biotechnology law of Malaysia. Okay, next one, please. And then, okay, the third issue, once we have settled the first issue and the second issue, the third one would be, do we need a specific law on biotechnology or for biotechnology, or is it sufficient? Can it be done? Is it enough? Is it legally accepted if we can just use the existing law? Because if we need to do a specific law on biotechnology, meaning that we have to go through the initial process of presenting from the ministry up to getting the votes in Malaysia, and then normally the processes would take around a year or more to do, as compared to if you just amend the existing law. So if this can be done, if option B can be done, so which law actually we are targeting, which law that we need to tinker or to amend so that we can accommodate with the pressing needs of biotechnology industry? Okay, next one. And then because of that, so in addressing these three issues, the Malaysian Parliament, at the same time the ministry, have to look at these policy makers and the lawmakers have to go back to the drawing board and then see, and then try to identify what is actually the status and the status of TRIPS. Is it a policy document or is it a law document? As you can see from my slide, the policy has a different objective, and so are the law. Law is more like a formal because it has to go through processes which you cannot escape or which you cannot skip. You have to go through each processes and get the approval, get the enough vote, and every time if you don't get the vote, the bill will be thrown out. So it's a very formal document. You have to go through certain things, and then it is actually for certain purposes, mostly actually to drive the economy and also for public safety and peace. And then especially in case of biotechnology, is riddled with a lot of moral issues, ethical issues. So people are not comfortable at that time. So we have to handle this thing. And then also at the policy stream, if you look at the left, policy stream is more actually is more like a directional document that actually gives you or direct the pathway for the country for the next 20 or 30 years. It's a long-term document. So it has a different objective, these two documents. And the implementation document, the types of document for these two streams, policy stream and legal streams, are also different. For policy instrument, you can see that I have listed there. We have 4 categories of instrument. We have the law and regulation, we have the economy or the fiscal, And then we have information-based instrument or the cooperation-based document. Law and regulation, I think most of people are familiar. And then many countries or many government prefer law and regulation document because it is actually the command and control document. It has the power to mandate certain things, and if it is mandated by the law, if you violate the provisions of the law, it becomes a legal offense and you can be punished. So people, a lot of countries prefer this law document to execute a policy document. And then for economy, it's like subsidies or tax or incentive, financial incentive. So that kind is so that it could actually give some moral to actually to support the development of the industry for socio-economic development. And then for information based, it's more like awareness or education program, and cooperation is more MOUs and more like collaboration and partnership. So the last two, information and cooperation, it doesn't have enough mandate or legal authority. So like I said that the first one, the law is always preferable, and then you can see on the left side, the right box, the law, it has a various type of law, so different categories of law. So you need to know what kind of problem is it. Is this a national problem or is it an organizational problem? Because if it's a national problem, then you have to come up with a law or a statutory law. In Malaysia, this law is called act or ordinance or enactment, as compared to if it's just this problem, biotech problem, is just a problem that can be solved at organization level, then you don't need the law. You just need maybe a circular or maybe just need a guideline, because you need to make sure that you are actually assigning enough power, you're giving enough power to right parties. If you give more than necessary power to wrong parties, then there's a tendency for the power to be abused. Or if you don't give enough power to the right parties, then it could also hinder the government from implementing the policy or the law, because they don't have enough power and then they cannot command certain things. So these are the balance that we need to know in determining whether what kind of document we want to produce. If we say that this is law document, which category of law that we need to produce, because we need to be very careful. We need to give just enough power to the right parties. Okay, so these are the issues that Malaysians have to deliberate. And then next, please. And then, okay, so in the end of the day, after looking at the TRIPS document, it is decided that TRIPS is actually a legal document because it has the mandatory power. Because you look at Article 1 of the TRIPS document, it's very clear that it wanted Malaysia to obey and to adhere to those provisions so that we can have a harmonized law on biotechnology. This is nothing strange. Now you look at it in the hindsight or you look back, it's nothing strange. But back then in 1998, it is something strange because biotechnology then was a new phenomenon for us in Malaysia. So once we decided that TRIPS is actually a law document, so now we say that, okay, we already have the law. So now the question is that, okay, how do we do this? How do we approach this? So we say that, okay, we do the law first and then later on we do the policy. Because if you remember my slide, the issue number 3, we say is that what do we do when we have the law but no policy, and what do we do if we have policy but no law? So we have to close this gap. We need to have in the country, in Malaysia, we need to have a policy, because policy have a different objective, and so are the laws have different policies. So we need to have these two documents side by side. So the Malaysian government decided, okay, we focus on the law first, because this is clearly that is a legal obligation, Malaysian obligation and responsibility, international responsibility towards TRIPS. So we do this, and then we say that, do we need to provide a specific law? And then it was decided no, because when we do the benchmark, we see that actually not many countries have a specific law on biotechnology, so that it is easier and faster if we just amend the existing law. So we chose, after going through all since biotechnology invention is type of IP, so we look at, patent law, Patent Act is the most suitable act to be amended. So we just go through the parliamentary processes to amend the existing patent law. So nowadays, if you look at the provision of Patent Act, you can see that the provisions of TRIP is now inserted in section 11 until section 17. Is there. We just do some tinkering and then just integrate the requirements of Article 27. The most glaringly is that Article 27 Clause 3 of TRIP is embedded in section 16 of Patent Act of Malaysia. So after we've done that, okay, now we start to focus that, okay, we have the law, but we don't have the policy. Can we go back to can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, the next, okay, now because once we have done the law, we amended the Patent Act, and then this one we benchmark with the international practices I mentioned is there from section 16, 11 to 16, and then after that the Ministry of Science, Technology, and Innovation starts to do the policy. And this is where we actually need to be more careful because the provision of the law becomes mandatory. So we cannot copy exactly the same provision as the law, but we do it so that in a sense that it becomes more directional, more in a way we diluted the provisions of the law and make it as a policy. So now the policy, so that the policy can set the national direction for biotechnology to flourish. This is actually in line so that we now currently after that I think mostly took about a year to do the policy as well, and then now we have by the year 2005 already have the national policy of the first national biotechnology policy. So now in Malaysia, if you are looking for specific law for biotechnology, we cannot find, but you can find it is there embedded in section 11 and 16. So what about plant variety? Because plant variety is also part of biotechnology law. So we don't put plant variety in our patent law, but plant variety we wait for a little while, and then we in 2005, after we have done the policy, Malaysian Parliament, the Ministry start to table the Plant Variety Act to Malaysia. So for plant variety, we have a specific law. Before this, we don't have, but now we have. And then the law, we don't actually start from what we call this from scratch, but actually after we've done the benchmark, we actually adopted more or less what the European plant variety law is like. So if you make a comparison, it's almost look the same because we benchmark our Plant Variety Act based on the European versions. And then in Malaysia, we also have another type of patent. We have the utility patent. Sometimes because this is to accommodate the new inventors, so that whoever come to just to encourage them to keep on inventing in terms of biotechnology. So we have this kind of three what we call this legal instrument to support the biotechnology industry. So now in 2022, we came out with the new versions of National Biotechnology Policy because the first one expires in the year 2020. So we have to come up, we took mostly another 2 years to come up with newer versions of biotechnology policy. Okay, that will be all. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Professor. That was great. Really helpful national example of the implementation of science, technology, and innovation policy. We're very glad. There will be questions after the next presentation, so I hope you can stick around because I think there are quite a number of people who are interested in your presentation. Can I turn it now finally over to Dimo Kowalski for a final presentation on procurement for innovation? Dimo, please.
Slides showing, and can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, and the slides are fine.
Okay, so back to the beginning, as Fernando pointed out, among the many interesting things that he said, we're going to discuss a little bit about public procurement as a tool to stimulate innovation, but through a case study, which I hope you have downloaded and read. This is also a little bit of an experiment. We're trying to find some modus of using case studies and materials outside of the actual confines of the live event of a webinar. So please bear with us. And again, thank you very much for your cooperation on this. So public procurement as a tool to stimulate innovation, one type of policy instruments out of hundreds perhaps. The idea is to procure specific innovative technologies, products, and services. The second goal is to stimulate the development of absorptive capacities and innovative capabilities, and to enhance firm-level competitiveness. A secondary objective, but very important, is to support pre-commercial development and as well to share the market risk with the firm and provide some cash flow through the initial purchase. As many of us know, startups or young firms usually have cash flow issues, and even though they have good products with commercial potential and functional prototypes and quite a good perspective, they get killed in early years or early development stages by a lack of cash flow. They have spent a lot of time and on resources and product development, but then the actual purchases, the demand does not come in. Finally, is really important thing with public procurement is that it plays a catalyst role in that it links firms and very diverse stakeholders into a functional national innovation system type of situation. So, apologies for this. The case study here deals with the fake country of Norland and its technology procurement program. Of course, I'm going to repeat a few things that were in the case study just to enhance discussion and remind everyone what it was about. So the NTPP started in 2008. The objective was to reduce electricity use and improve energy efficiency. The specific goal was to cut electricity demand by 7.5 terawatt hours by 2025, down from the current consumption, which was about in 2008, which was 50 terawatt hours. The focus is on energy efficient refrigerator freezers. While this may seem kind of like a micro concern from a point of view of global impact and global issues and SDGs, in fact, the research found that refrigerators actually use 30% of household electricity, and households will use between a quarter to half of all electricity nationwide. So a purchasing group was formed between several agencies, all which manage either low-cost or social rentals, or are associations of landlords and associations of landlords, and also people who manage procurement for public institutions such as schools and training centers and so forth. The actual policy instrument was to group procure refrigerators if the actual vendors and producer of refrigerators could beat the efficiency of current models by 40%. Then there was another instrument there, a second instrument, that was a 30% subsidy for the initial purchase to get things going. The program was successful. Electroland won the bid with a model that uses 0.88 kilowatt hours annually. The chosen model was 33% more efficient than the best available on the market. The initial order grew to 7,320 units, with more than 3,000 units sold privately as well by 2015. The total energy savings reached 1 gigawatt hour by 2015, with a projected 1 terawatt hour annually by 2025. And this company, even though it was not from a European country and not from Europe, had success in exports to Europe after certifications, and which boosted the company's Electroland market presence there. So this is just in short an overview of the case study. This case study is based on a real case. It's just that the country and the producers have been anonymized, and this company is doing very well today worldwide. So thank you for your attention on this. We're going to gauge some of the understanding on the case study, through the Mentimeter questions in a few moments. So with this, I leave you and I rest available in the Q&A to follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dimo. I think Fiora will put up the QR code for the Mentimeter, and then we can have the 4 questions that were asked. Litri, thank you very much. For those who have been able to consult the case study, we would really appreciate if you're able to put in your answers to the question on how did the NTPP use public procurement for innovation. As we see the numbers come in, by leveraging bulk purchasing power to encourage innovation. Dimo, I don't know if you wanted to comment on this.
Yes, sure. Yes. It's interesting that the first things, and this is partly in noted in Fernando's discussion as well, the first thing that people always grab onto is their funding for R&D in new technologies. And we saw this as the first votes come in. It is really funding as a policy instrument is really the obvious one. And in fact, when we do our policy views and do our policy advisory services, we often have to battle with asking our stakeholders in these review processes, and even when developing a new policy, to have a look perhaps at the other 200 policy instruments available and provide a mix that is both well targeted, but that doesn't undermine the funding either, you know. So we're not asking for a large switch, but really a rethinking about the spectrum of policy instruments that are available, and why not consider many of them. I had a question on this earlier before in the chat. I hope I answered that. So yes, we're having a leveraging bulk purchasing power to encourage innovation, very, very useful tool. And there was some funding as well, R&D funding, but it was not, I don't think it was a major factor. It was more of a factor of giving some kind of importance and some kind of approval to all the companies that participate in the RFO. So can we have the next question, please? Thank you to all participants. Thank you. So what was the main goal of the NTPP? So this is an example of how public procurement not only is targeted at providing innovation incentive for a particular targeted sector and industry, but also for households, meaning for a specific stakeholder group, and as well as addressing the sustainable development goals. Clearly, you know, with the need to move away from fossil fuel energies, most of the savings of electrical use will actually reduce demand for electricity. The reduction in demand for electricity will be affected in a reduction in fossil fuel capacity, as new capacities will be largely built on renewables. So we have but that can only be accomplished by replacing old and inefficient equipment here. So we have largely yes, reduction in national electricity demand. Very good. So I think we have enough questions. Promote input, I don't know, but yeah, yes. Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Let's go to the last question. Thank you, participants, and let's have a go at this one. So how innovative is the NTPP strategy in promoting energy efficiency? Do you consider it very innovative? Somewhat, not very, not innovative at all. Okay. So mostly positive responses so far. So there are some people who think procurement is not a very innovative policy instrument. Clearly, the concept behind it may be more or less innovative. It depends on how it is formulated. If it is formulated to enhance innovation, yes, one can call it innovative. Ordinary public procurement, where one of the government is just looking to procure goods or services that it may not be, but on the other hand, it might be supportive of local firms and industries, in particularly the SME sector. Here it is really important to have also a look at the procurement law. And what does it say, or the procurement guidelines for public institutions, and what do they say about the type of firms that they can put on their roster for approved certified firms that they can procure from. And sometimes there's a bias, there's a skew towards large and often international firms and industries. As they used to say, Pierre may remember, because we're of similar vintage. In the 90s, people used to say no one got fired for buying IBM. So if in the procurement sector, often people go for the safest thing, which is buying the very well-known high-end international producer of whatever is being done. So yes, so what do we have here? Somewhat, so yeah, largely either somewhat or very innovative. So thank you very much for your votes, and also thank you very much. I hope you were not guessing, but you were giving an educated response based on reading the case study. And if you wish to write me with some concerns or ideas about how we can implement this even better, you have my email. Please write to Workstream 6. It is on the web page, and please let me know. So for this, I will conclude now. Thank you everyone for your participation. It was very interesting for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dimo. I apologize to all the participants. I have been a poor timekeeper here. We're about 5 minutes over. I believe many of the questions have been answered in the chat, but if there is a burning question, I'm happy to open it up for some last feedback from the participants. I'm just going to actually, if everybody is happy with the amount of information they've received today and they have the contacts they need for further follow-up, I would just want to ask one last Mentimeter question, and I hope Vistry can put it up. What is your key takeaway from today? And I think that that would help us close out the session very nicely. Thank you. And I'm thinking this is a word cloud. I'm not sure. Just quickly respond so that we can have some feedback for tomorrow and the following day. Thank you. Very useful. Thank you. Excellent. Good. I'm glad we're being informative and useful. And I'm glad that you've picked up on a number of the key messages from today. We do believe that a number of the tools that we provided today, and also the very helpful national example from Associate Professor Ashikin, would help you so that you can reach out and find more information. Hopefully these will be helpful for your next steps in your STI policy development. We thank you very much for your attention today, and we look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. Thank you, everyone. See you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.